the one thing is you have to be flexible. Like as a producer, the word there is literally flexibility in terms of just always being like having the plan, but then being able to totally deviate from the plan at a moment's notice and be able to let all the people that you work with know that that's what you're doing. And hopefully at home, no one notices that you've had to deviate from the plan because they didn't know what the plan was.
Welcome to the Next Level Journalist, where you will hear from some of the best journalists in the business or who have been there, done that, and willing to share with you what they've learned so you can get better, faster.
My guest today is the Assistant News Director at WLEX-TV in Lexington, Kentucky. Jennifer Smith, thank you so much for making time for this today, as you are the first Assistant News Director on this platform.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it was a no-brainer to have you on here. I worked with you when you were a producer, and then obviously years later, here you are as the Assistant News Director. We can talk about that transition and so much more, I know, through this conversation. So let's go down memory lane for you, if you will, and tell us a little bit about your background and what got you interested in journalism, and basically bring us up to date with what you're doing.
So when I was younger, I grew up in a household of my parents were not really overly interested in the news. But even from a young age, like I was very interested in news, wanted to watch the nightly news, wanted to watch the local news in the Chicago area, which is where I grew up. And I remember in 7th grade, we had like a career day at school, and somebody from one of the local affiliates came out to talk with us. It was actually a weather person, but I remember I just always had the bug and was very interested. So when I started looking at school, I ended up at the University of Missouri, which has a great journalism program, and went through there. I think I was always kind of settled on TV. But then when I got there, you go through the tract and you work on at the radio station. You learn how to report a story. You learn how to be a photographer. You learn all those things. For a stint, I was the weekend anchor there at the NBC affiliate. But I really liked and was drawn to producing. I liked the idea of kind of taking something at the beginning of the day, starting it and shaping it throughout the whole day. And then you kind of have this finished product at the end of the day. Plus you know a little bit about every single story. I almost felt like when I would go out and report a story, I almost felt this like I didn't know what else was going on. I just knew about my story. And I sort of like to know a little bit about all the stories. So that was where my interests ended up being. And so from there, the Missouri Mafia, as they call it. People are kind of spread out all around the country. At the time, I went to Channel 27 out of school, which is the WKYT. It's the CBS affiliate here in Lexington. And at the time, the news director, the assistant news director, and the assignment editor had all gone to Missouri. So when they were looking for a morning show producer, they just reached out to the school, and that is one of those things, like the connections there have been really valuable. So I started there. I was there for about a year, and the overnight hours were tough, like very tough on me. And I thought, I don't know if I really want to do this. Maybe I don't. And so I actually got out of the business for 2.5 years, and I worked in public relations for Transylvania University, which is also here in Lexington. And I had a good experience there, but I missed it. Like almost the second I left, I missed it. So I'm a sucker for punishment. And I ended up coming and being hired as a producer here at LEX-18. And at the time, they were expanding their nightly newscast. So when I first started, they did just an hour from 6 to 7 p.m. But they started, they transitioned back and did a 5:30, 6. So I started doing the 12 and 5:30. And I think since I started here in 1999, so going on, more than 20 years. And I've pretty much produced, I think, every show that there is here. And then probably about 10 years ago, I ended up getting promoted to EP. And then our longtime news director retired and our assistant news director moved to Nashville. So I was the interim news director here for about 10 months. And then I've been the assistant news director for about 18 months. So kind of a whirlwind in the last couple of years.
Wow, that's so interesting. I had no idea about that transition. You know, you hear about people going from behind the scenes to in front of the camera, but you know, to go the other way. Talk about that transition. What that was like. Because the first word that I think is, you know, humility. I think a lot of people get into TV to be on TV. Whether it be pride or humility thing, like I said, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But you're definitely the first person I've talked to that's done it the other way around. So talk about that transition and what that was like for you. And I understand, like you said, you want to know about the big picture. So if you could just dive a little deeper into that, what that transition was like.
Sure. Well, I think being a reporter takes a special skill set. And I'm so in awe of the reporters that can really go out there, connect with the community, get people to speak to them, especially on stories that, if you think about it, it's usually someone's worst day. You're meeting them on their absolute worst day. And I remember when I, of course, got into the business, I thought, oh, yeah, I want to be a reporter, want to be an anchor. And you're right. I think a lot of people are drawn to that. That's the side that we see. And for lack of a better term, sure, it seems a little glamorous. Like people know who you are and you're out in the community. And I'll never forget, I was actually out on a story in Jefferson City, Missouri. And it was kind of like out in the outskirts. And there was somebody, it was like a drowning. Somebody had fallen into water and they were out like looking for their body. And I remember being out there and it was one of those moments for me where I thought, I don't know that I was very uncomfortable about like approaching the family. I didn't know how to do it. Like, I mean, I had to go back to my car. Like I just couldn't, I was just so nervous about pushing through that. And I think that was the very first kind of key to me that like, ooh, I don't know. This might just not be something that I'm comfortable with. And I think that there are people that are great at that. And I think that they're sensitive and they can approach a family that's grieving or reach out to somebody that's struggling and kind of go that route, and they're super gifted. I think I decided, oh boy, I don't know that this is what I'm meant for. And so, that it's kind of this whole semester where you get an opportunity to go out and do stories, but you also get an opportunity to like anchor the Today Show cut-ins or produce the Today Show cut-ins. Like they kind of funnel you through and you do a little bit of each. And so I found that what I really enjoyed doing was I liked going in and like putting together the cut-ins and rushing the scripts around and helping get everybody in place and talking to them behind the scenes. And so it sort of almost just became like a natural progression throughout that semester where I gravitated more towards that. And as I got to know the professors, and actually the way University of Missouri is set up, they own the NBC affiliate. So you're working, you are like the deadlines are daily, they're there. And most of the professors had been producers, EPs, news directors in bigger markets and had come back to share their knowledge. And, just talking with them, I saw that there were so many opportunities that I had never thought of before. So that's kind of how I started going that way. And then the more that I got into producing, the more I realized I like being in control of like setting the standard of like, these are the stories we're going to cover. This is the thought process I want to take throughout the day. And I want to craft it in this way so that at the end of the day, I can look and say, boy, I really liked how I set this up and the way I, scripted all the anchor reads and how I positioned the stories.
Yeah, that's great, Jennifer. And I appreciate that transparency about, what, that moment might have been like for you, just so you're giving, people who are either trying to get into the business about, really what it's like, and just what type of person it takes to do that. And, me knowing you well enough to know that you are certainly a person that, could, approach someone who's going through their worst day, like you said, but it's you've got to be passionate about it. I mean, that's clearly no question about that. And So I appreciate you sharing that story. I think that, you know, it will definitely resonate with anyone pursuing news, especially obviously in sports. It was a little different for me, not a whole lot. Those were typically people's best days, but
Right.
I appreciate that. That was a great story that you shared, and I think that can resonate with a lot of people. But while it does take a special person to be that type of reporter, it also takes a special person to be where you are. And like you said, see the big picture. You know, as a reporter, you're worried about, you know, one package, maybe a couple VOSOTs, but you know, in your position, you have to worry about the entire thing. So talk about what goes into maybe what your daily, for lack of better words, routine looks like, you know, what's required from you on a daily basis, and putting together, you know, an entire show or shows.
Right. So as the assistant news director, one of the things, and of course, COVID has made things so strange, obviously,
Right.
but we connect in the morning, all the reporters like on a Zoom call. You got kind of the big screen with everybody there, and we have, we use a tool called Slack. It's an app, but essentially reporters, anchors, anybody can put their ideas like, hey, I'm reaching out about this, or I saw this email, I'm going to call about this. So kind of before the meeting, I get together with our assignment editor and we sort of discuss number one, the day of events. Like those are the things that people send that say like, oh, we're having a press conference about this, or oh, there's a make a wish, like maybe a feature story. And we kind of say, okay, those are the things that we know are going on today. Then, there's a real emphasis here at the station of people enterprising stories. And so, it's going through those pitches in the morning, being up to date on what's going on, nationally, internationally, just kind of knowing a little bit about what happened overnight here. And then going through the reporter stories, like what they've pitched, and then we just go through the meeting and essentially say like, okay, this reporter's maybe wants to handle this angle. And we really do try to be open and have a discussion and try to be helpful, because if you think about it, in any typical newsroom, you have people that have maybe been in this market for a long time and know a lot of players and know a lot of who to contact about this, who's the best person, who normally talks. But then you also have a lot of people that might be just getting, maybe this is their second job or whatever, and they don't know anybody here. And the one thing that I always encourage and I think is so important in a newsroom level is being open and helpful to the people that are newer. Like, hey, you don't want to have a meeting. You want this to be a cooperative effort,
Mhm.
not a competitive one, in that you're like, oh, I'm going to withhold this source from somebody. So, we spend a lot of time like saying, hey, what's the best way that we can tell this story? Does anyone have a contact that she could reach out to or he could reach out to make this story better? And of course, during COVID, one of the hardest things, at first, we were in this sort of crisis mode, and we heard from a lot of officials. And I think, yeah, there was a purpose for that. The governor's giving you the updates. The health department's telling you what you need to do, talking about vaccines or whatever. But now we're so many months into this crisis, we've really had to step back and look at what are the stories that are going to resonate with people. And it always comes back to the people stories. It's not, it's almost like, hey, if there's the governor saying something about this new, let's say, COVID strain that people are concerned about. Well, that's great. And maybe that's a setup, VOSOP, but what we really want to hear from is somebody that's had it, somebody that's treated somebody with it, something that gives you more of that human angle. So during the day, once we kind of determine, okay, these are what the stories the reporters are going to be working on, then it's a lot of coordination of like, okay, this person's going to be paired up with this photographer, and then, they're going to be in this show, and we kind of script it through the day. So I spend a lot of time working with the reporters out in the field who are kind of updating me. Hey, this story's panning out, or I'm struggling. Do you know of another person I could call? Then I'm also reaching out to the producers, and we're kind of refining their shows. And then of course during the day you have a lot of stories that aren't reporter stories, they might just be like a little update, just a little VO as we call them. And so it's working with the producers to make sure that they're like sticking those in and all that. And then of course, I'm also responsible for all the scheduling of everybody. So there's a lot of my time can be spent on things like, putting together the anchor schedule, approving vacation time, making sure I've got so and so to cover the weekend shift. So some juggling like that. And then I still keep my hand in special projects like the Kentucky Derby, different things like that. So kind of coordinating some of those special events as we do them. Last year was not a great year for special events, obviously, pretty much canceled, but
Yep.
that's something I do enjoy. And that's one of those where I look forward to that as sort of a little bit of a break from you know, the daily grind of news. A lot of time those special projects are something fun, like the cats going to, on a tournament trip or the Derby or things like that.
Let's talk about one special event that pops into my mind is obviously the Kentucky Derby. That's a big deal across the country, but obviously right there in Kentucky. So, you are part of a crew that gets, it seems like Emmy after Emmy and AP award after AP award for the work that's done for that particular event. So give us an idea of what it takes to be a great producer, because again, they don't just hand those type of awards out for anything. And obviously I've been a part of those productions, so honored to be part of those and just see the work that you all put in. I mean, obviously I know what I put in, but you guys have to worry about the entire day versus I have to handle the sports thing. Obviously the Kentucky Derby is a sport, but a completely different animal is the Kentucky Derby. And if you can somehow explain to people, what an event like that, what it takes to put together a program, because it's an all day long broadcast basically. So if you could put that in a Cliff Notes version of, really what it takes to produce something like that and just produce with excellence.
So the one thing I would say that sticks in my mind is, I mean, it's a true team effort, and we start talking about the Derby the day after the Derby the year before. Like it's a year long thought process. And no, you're not working on it every day, but throughout the year, like I'm collecting ideas, we're brainstorming, we're having little meetings just to talk about like, hey, maybe we could do something different this year, talking about anchor pairings, stuff like that. But, it's an event where sometimes there could be 75 to 80 people involved in that. And that starts all the way at the production level where you're talking that they're out there for a full almost week prior to the event, laying the cable, getting the camera shots set up, like making sure that all those details are just absolutely perfect. And we couldn't put on a good show if we didn't have like the technical support from those people that are just, and that's like absolutely the most non-glamorous job, if you could think of one, is just, laying that cable, making sure all the IFB connections work, all of that stuff, because it's multiple cameras, multiple reporters, and multiple anchor pairings. And then, like you said, we start at 6 a.m. and we go, till NBC takes on at, I think they've been starting at like 2:30 in the afternoon. And then of course, we do like a post Derby wrap up. But, it's a really fun day out there. But I think a lot of people, especially anybody that's involved in it, everybody wants to be a part of it. But then when you start working on it, you realize just how much work it is to make it what it is. And, that's everything from collaborating with you all, like in sports, where it is the, premier sporting event, you could argue, at least for the horse racing community. And, you all becoming experts on that and sort of telling sometimes, I think, but typical year as the sports department's doing sometimes 20 to 25 packages on each contender in those races. And that takes a lot of time and research. And then, of course, assigning reporters who are out there the day of, turning those fun stories, what it's like to have a mint julep, what it's, the big crowds out there, what it's like to sort of bring that experience to somebody at home that's maybe never been there or couldn't get out there that year. And it's exciting, like, to be out there. The energy out there is really exciting. And as far as producing, like, there's so much that goes into it in terms of like scripting out the day. Like, you start with a plan, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking for the whole day. A beautiful open, all these gorgeous camera shots, and you've got to put it to paper of this is how I want the day to go. But then when you get out there, it's just on paper. So things always happen. Every year something happens. A horse scratches, you've got to move everything around. It rains like crazy and a shot goes down and you can't have the reporter out there you were planning to. So the one thing is you have to be flexible. Like, as a producer, the word there is literally flexibility, in terms of just always being like having the plan, but then being able to totally deviate from the plan at a moment's notice and be able to let all the people that you work with know that that's what you're doing. And hopefully at home, no one notices that you've had to deviate from the plan because they didn't know what the plan was. So I think that's, as far as producing goes, like, I love producing like live shows. Like, it's exciting to go out there. It doesn't stress me out that things are going to happen. I just know they are going to happen. And it's just, how do I handle that? And, if you're always trying to think like, what's the next thing? Like, what's the next thing I can do? And the main thing is just staying calm and trying to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Because at the end of the day, as a producer, the thing that always really bothers me or makes me sad is if I feel like I've let down the anchors and reporters that are out in the field. Because if I don't communicate what's going on properly to them or to the director, then nobody knows who I am. They're not saying, oh, Jennifer Smith really messed that up and it wasn't, that didn't look very good. Instead, they're like, oh no, Kyle Scott tossed to something and it wasn't even there. Like, what was he doing? And so I hate that feeling. I don't want to let the crew out in the field down. My job is to make them look good and thus the show look good, to give them all the tools to make sure they succeed. If they succeed, I succeed.
Yeah, I love that, Jennifer. I mean, I hear preparation, I hear flexibility, communication. I think a lot of people don't realize, and maybe they do, I don't know, but without the producers and the people behind the scenes, the people in front of the camera can't do what they do. I mean, it really is, like you said before, it's a team effort. But if you can think about some of the skills and the skill set needed to be a great producer, I know I just mentioned a few of them because you just mentioned all those. But if someone's watching this thinking, what exactly does it take to be a producer? And again, you mentioned some of them. What comes to mind on top of being flexible, being someone who's prepared? Because it's such an important piece of the puzzle. I mean, you are literally in control of the entire show as far as putting it together. While again, just someone like me in sports, I just had to worry about the sports section. There was so much that went into being a producer, though. Is there anything that you can share that you haven't shared already?
Sure. I think the first thing is like organization. Like, when you're, and the thing that is so interesting about being a producer is, like, I feel like every single day you start with a blank slate. Like, you start with an open rundown that's just not filled out. And so you, number one, need to be organized of like structuring your day so that you meet all the deadlines. And there's a lot of deadlines in news. And I think that, that's one of those things for any journalist, like meeting deadlines. But being organized, so like time management, things like that. I think being a good writer is essential. Being a good researcher is essential. And being accurate, going over your work. Because if you think about it, as a producer, you have your hand in multiple things. And it's really easy to be on the phone, plus writing a script. Good to go back and just triple check that while you were doing that, you didn't misspell something or write something in a way that when it pops up in the prompter, the anchor's like gets confused because you've got two thes in the sentence or something like that. The other thing is I think communication is so important. You've got to communicate to the reporters who are in your show. You have to communicate with the anchors who are reading those scripts and make sure that they're comfortable. And if there's weird pronunciation things, that you put them in there so it doesn't trip them up. You also need to communicate with weather, the sports team, every single person, to kind of see like, hey, does weather need extra time today? Is there something they'd like to do different? There's also a creativity angle. Like, while the rundown's blank every day, I think it's easy to get into a rut of like, I do this the same way. I open the show the same way. I have this person toss the same way. Weather's the same. And I think we have the opportunity every day to look and say, what can I do that's a little different? Can I pick some extra sound at the top that's really emotional to draw people in? Can I do something that helps promote social media or our website or something like that? Like, it's looking at ways that you can make it different every single day. So, and then of course, when, you know, you have to be flexible, because not even just the Derby, but just a regular news day, things
Right.
happen. People are out on a story, they get a flat tire, something happens, they miss their deadline, the weather gets bad, something happens, and you have to pivot. And you need to be able to communicate that to a lot of people in a calm way, and also have a backup plan. And I think that if, one of the major things about being a producer is you really do need to have good people skills. You can't go into every, newsrooms can be like emotional places. It can be really intense, but treating people with respect and just communicating in a clear manner avoids a lot of the drama. I think if you can just kind of just tell everybody what the plan is, most people don't get worked up. If they only get worked up if it seems like nobody knows what's going on. So you
Mhm.
just need to kind of take control, communicate that to the best of your ability, and then pretty much everything works itself out.
Yeah, that's all those qualities that you just mentioned about a producer. I have no doubt if a reporter's watching this, or if an anchor's watching this, MMJ, whatever, if they try to, if they pursue those qualities, they'll be a great journalist. I mean, because
Absolutely.
that stuff is that's great stuff, Jennifer. Thank you so much for sharing that. What are some lessons you've learned in your years of doing what it is that you do and being in TV? Some lessons that you can think back to, whether they be early on, or a lesson that you learned yesterday, whatever it may be, anything that comes to mind, that you can share with us that you're like, well, I won't do that again.
Yeah. So I think, um, gosh, there's probably there's probably so many over the years, and I think, a lot of it is, especially today, and this is something that, with how we've started to do, for example, a lot more interviews and things kind of via Zoom. It's become a lot more acceptable, where, with the safety reasons and stuff. But as an assistant news director, like, I worry, and I worry all the time about, this. I think there's this right now, kind of, people think and throw out the words like fake news or making mistakes, or they easily want to call out, and say, well, this is fake. And I worry so much about, and we talk about this in our meetings, just about being so cautious and trying to verify stories. Because I think it's, we brought this up, like, for COVID. Like, what if somebody were to reach out to you and say, like, oh, I've got, COVID, and I've got this GoFundMe page, and, like, it's this really compelling story. Like, what are the steps that you need to make sure that you're taking to make sure that this isn't someone that's trying to, like, take advantage, use a situation. I don't know why someone would do that, but, like, I think as we've moved into this world of social media and things like that, like, there's more opportunities for people to, like, try to do things like that. So that's something that we really talk about a lot. Just really verify your sources. Do everything you can to triple check, whether it's asking for, documentation, Googling, triple checking, looking at all of those things. That's really important. And the other thing, a lot of times you're going to work like the nights, the weekends, the holidays. If you're in sports or even news, like you're going to work those unusual shifts, you're going to work holidays. And it's hard when you have a lot of family members or a spouse or friends that aren't in that business. They don't really understand, what do you mean you can't get off at this time? Or what do you mean you can't leave and come out with us or whatever, because you got to be up at 2 a.m. to work. And I think it's easy to get discouraged and say, oh, maybe I don't want to do this. I'd rather do something that's more fun, or a different kind of job. But what we do matters. And I think everybody kind of pays their dues. And if you work really hard in this business, like that's what I always said, like I might not be the most talented person, but like nobody's going to outwork me. And I think that if journalists coming out kind of go with that, like you'll never go wrong.
Yeah, that's super stuff. The one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about, being so cautious, especially this day and age. And the thing that went through my mind is just about the quote unquote the media and the connotations that go with that. When people think of the media, what's that like, especially from a position that you're in dealing with people who don't trust the media and how they put, different media in that category of fake news or whatever that looks like. I mean, as an assistant news director, what's that like navigating through this time?
Yeah, it's been tough. In the last couple of years, I feel like, that fake news has kind of become the buzzword. And, we'll take phone calls into the newsroom or emails, Facebook messages, and it's almost kind of like if somebody doesn't like something, that's the first thing they jump to. They'll go, oh, y'all are fake, or this is fake. And, we've just tried to really, like, number one, if it's somebody that calls in the newsroom and I'm answering the phone, we try to be polite and respectful and things like that. But I think, we just try to point them like, this is where we've sourced this information. This is where, we try to be transparent about giving our sources where we've gotten this information. But it's tough because you do get people, they'll share like these stories that are from websites that aren't vetted and say like, why aren't you covering this story? And, it's a real education process. Like, I really think that there's a group of people out there today that don't even know how to vet news sources. They just see something on Twitter and they take it as gospel. And, we have to work really hard, I think, now to educate people just as much about how to get those good news sources.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Jennifer. And that last question really just popped into my head. So I was actually going to let you off the hook earlier, but I had to take advantage of that opportunity to ask you what it's like to deal with, being in the media and that fake news element. So thank you so much for what you shared there and what you shared in this whole conversation. I know there's plenty more we could talk about, but I want to respect your time. As people can tell, you are at the station and working hard. It looks like the weather department right behind you, right?
It is. They're getting ready, and
Yeah, so
Keith's getting ready to do BBN tonight.
all right. Well, like I said, I appreciate your time, and you're clearly at work and making time for this. So, Jennifer Smith, thank you so much for making time for this.
Thanks. Good to speak with you.
And thank you for checking out this channel. If you found this content beneficial, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone you think might find it beneficial as well, because this channel was simply started and created to serve you, to help others grow, to learn how other successful TV journalists do or did it. So take what serves you so you can get better faster and reach your next level.